My life was a spreadsheet, balanced and meticulously planned. I lived in a modern high-rise in the city, the kind with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that reminded you of the hustle you contributed to every day. My only family was a cat named Newton, and my work as a senior analyst at one of the country's largest tech conglomerates, Innovatech, was my entire world. It wasn't just a job, it was my purpose, my passion, and the thing that gave my quiet life its loud meaning. But in the high-stakes world of corporate deals, the line between an asset and a liability can blur in an instant. This is a story about how a single email, a silent act of corporate espionage, brought down a man who thought he was untouchable and ended a deal that was worth more than I could ever dream of earning. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. For 18 months, my life was nothing but the Nexus project. It was an ambitious, groundbreaking initiative to acquire a smaller, revolutionary AI firm. The deal, valued at a staggering $500 million, was meant to be the capstone of Innovatech's corporate strategy for the next decade. And I, as the lead senior analyst on the M&A team, was the one who had built the entire financial model from the ground up. I had lived and breathed the data, the projections, the risk assessments. Every late night, every cancelled weekend, every forgotten meal was in pursuit of making this deal happen. My boss, Robert Sterling, was a figure of immense power within Innovatech. At 50, he had the silver hair, designer suits, and a booming, charismatic laugh that made everyone, from junior interns to the CEO, hang on his every word. He had taken me under his wing 2 years ago, seeing something in my relentless work ethic and analytical skills. He often called me his secret weapon, the one who could find the needle in the haystack of corporate data. He was the face of the deal, the one who presented to the board and shook hands with the rival firm's executives, but I was the engine behind the scenes, ensuring every number, every clause, and every potential pitfall was accounted for. The final stretch of the deal was a whirlwind of due diligence meetings and legal reviews. The target company, a small but brilliant startup, was run by a visionary founder who had been hesitant to sell. Robert's charm and our incredibly detailed financial forecast, which I had crafted, were what finally won them over. The contract signing was scheduled for the end of the month. Everyone was euphoric. Robert had promised me a promotion and a significant bonus, not just a nice pat on the back, but a real reward that would change my financial life. I trusted him completely. He was my mentor, my champion. But there was a wrinkle, a growing tension that I couldn't ignore. Victoria Vance, a new director of business development, had been brought in 6 months prior. She was a sleek, aggressive shark with a reputation for stepping on toes to get ahead. She was supposed to be a collaborator, helping us with a last-minute market analysis, but she felt more like a competitor. She was constantly in Robert's office, the door ajar, their hushed conversations punctuated by low laughs. I told myself it was just standard corporate politicking, a senior leader grooming a new talent. I ignored the subtle shifts in Robert's demeanor, the way he would occasionally cut me off, or his quick, dismissive answers to my questions about Victoria's input. The Nexus project was too big, too important for anything to go wrong. I had placed all my professional faith in Robert, believing that in a sea of corporate ambition, our mutual success on this project was the only thing that mattered. The official signing day for the Nexus project arrived with all the pomp and circumstance one would expect for a $500 million deal. The CEO of Innovatech, along with the entire M&A team and the leadership of the acquired company, gathered in a grand conference room. I was there, sitting off to the side, a sense of quiet pride swelling in my chest. This was my moment, even if I was just a silent observer. Robert was at the head of the table, a picture of polished success. He delivered a flawless speech, thanking his team, with a special mention of my tireless analytical work, which earned me a polite round of applause. My promotion and bonus were on the horizon. I had made it. The next day, my promotion was not announced. The bonus was not discussed. I went to Robert's office, expecting to be pulled aside for a congratulatory chat. His assistant, however, told me he was in an urgent, closed-door meeting with the CEO. This happened for 2 days straight. A low hum of anxiety began to replace my earlier euphoria. On the third day, I finally cornered Robert in the hallway. He looked hurried, his usual confident smile replaced by a strained, tired expression. "Robert, I was just wondering about the promotion we discussed," I began, trying to keep my voice light. He stopped, his eyes darting around the hallway. "Olivia, not now. There have been some unexpected complications with the Nexus deal. We're on high alert. I'll talk to you when I can." He gave my shoulder a quick, tight squeeze that felt more like a warning than an assurance, and then hurried away. The complications he spoke of were a mystery. The deal was signed. Everything was finalized. What could possibly have gone wrong? I spent the rest of the day in a state of growing dread, trying to track down any information. My colleague, Ben Carter, a brilliant software engineer who often collaborated with my team on data infrastructure, noticed my distress. Ben was one of the few people at Innovatech I considered a genuine friend, a geeky, kind-hearted guy who often brought me coffee. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Liv," he said, leaning against my cubicle wall. "What's up?" I told him about Robert's strange behavior. Ben listened patiently, his brow furrowed. "That's not like him. He's usually all sunshine and rainbows after a win like this. Something's not right." That evening, the first whisper of a problem went from rumor to fact. The CEO sent out a terse, all-hands email stating that the Nexus deal was being put on hold indefinitely due to unforeseen legal and compliance issues. The news sent shockwaves through the company. Our stock took an immediate hit. The CEO's message was vague and defensive, and it pointed to a specific part of the deal that had been inexplicably flagged, a financial clause I had worked on for months, a clause I knew was watertight. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. This wasn't an unforeseen issue. This felt like sabotage. But by whom? And why? I reread the public-facing statement from the company, then I looked at the internal email. The language felt pointed, almost accusatory, but without naming anyone. I sat in my cubicle long after everyone else had left, the city lights twinkling outside my window. The Nexus project was my life's work. My promotion, my bonus, my professional reputation, they were all tied to it. And in a single moment, it was all being swept away by an unnamed issue. I didn't believe it was a coincidence. I knew it wasn't. I had been betrayed, and I knew who was behind it. The feeling was more than just anger, it was a deep, soul-crushing ache of betrayal. Robert, the man who had championed me, had somehow turned on me. It felt personal, a targeted strike. I had no idea why he would do it, but the chilling thought that it was connected to Victoria Vance, the company shark, made a horrifying kind of sense. The whispers, the closed doors, it all added up to a secret side deal, a plan I had been locked out of. My entire career at Innovatech was now in jeopardy. I knew I couldn't go to HR. I had no proof, just a gut feeling. I had to find out what really happened, to expose the truth, no matter what it cost me. And I had to do it quietly, carefully, without leaving a trace. This was no longer just about my promotion or my bonus. This was about justice. The company was in a state of chaos. People were whispering in hushed tones around the coffee machines, speculating about what had gone wrong with the Nexus deal. The general consensus was that someone on the M&A team had made a huge mistake. And since I was the lead analyst, all eyes seemed to be on me. The looks I got from my colleagues were a mix of pity and suspicion. I became an unofficial pariah. Robert kept his distance, always too busy to speak with me, and Victoria Vance seemed to be relishing the chaos. I saw her in the break room one morning, chatting with a group of colleagues, her gaze flicking over to me with a triumphant smirk. The confirmation was in her eyes. She knew something. They both did. I knew my only chance was to find hard proof. I started with my own computer. I reviewed every email, every document, every line of code I had written for the Nexus project. Everything was clean. The financial models were perfect. The legal clauses were vetted by a team of lawyers. The unforeseen legal and compliance issues that the CEO had mentioned were a lie. Someone had fabricated a problem. But how? And to what end? My mind kept going back to Robert's strange behavior in the days leading up to the announcement. He had been so secretive, so distant. Then I remembered something he'd told me a few months prior. Robert was a firm believer in the power of a paper trail, even a digital one. He had a habit of keeping a copy of every important email, not just in his inbox but in a personal, encrypted archive on the company server. He had once boasted to me that if anyone ever tried to frame him, he had the backup to prove his innocence. The irony was not lost on me. My technical skills were strong, but they were in data analysis, not system administration. This was a job for someone who could dig deep into the company's digital infrastructure. I knew I couldn't do it alone. The only person I trusted was Ben Carter, the software engineer who had been a good friend to me through all of this. He had the technical know-how to access the server and the ethical compass to know this was the right thing to do. I went to his desk after hours, the office a silent, ghostly place in the evening. I told him everything, the gut feeling, the strange behavior from Robert, Victoria's smug attitude, and my belief that the deal's collapse was no accident. I also told him about Robert's personal, encrypted archive. Ben listened carefully, his eyes darting between me and the code on his screen. An encrypted archive on the company server, that's a clever and stupid move, he said. It's like leaving a locked diary in a glass box. The lock might be good, but everyone knows it's there. He was skeptical at first, but when I showed him the CEO's vague email and pointed out the specific clause that was flagged, he grew quiet. He knew I had built that model. He had even helped me with some of the data flow. That's your clause, he said, his voice low. That part was airtight. It was the only part of the agreement that could protect Innovatech from a hostile takeover. It was my job to make sure the data flow was perfect. Exactly, I said. So how did a legal and compliance issue suddenly appear? Ben leaned back in his chair, a look of fierce concentration on his face. It didn't. It had to have been inserted. And that kind of change, after the final review, would have left a digital signature. Something in the metadata. He looked at me, a flicker of outrage in his eyes. You're right. We need to find this. We began our secret investigation that night. Ben's access to the server was limited to his department's needs, but he had a way of navigating the system's architecture. He began digging, trying to find the trace of a file that shouldn't have been there. It was slow, painstaking work. We met late at night, in empty conference rooms, talking in hushed whispers. Days turned into a week. Ben was a genius. He created a script that searched for any file or email with a timestamp that fell within the narrow window between the final legal review and the official signing. The company's servers were a sea of data, a labyrinth of 100,000 files and folders, but he was looking for a very specific type of digital anomaly. And then, he found it. He showed me his screen. A small folder, hidden within a nested directory, had a string of code attached to its metadata. It wasn't visible on the surface, but a deep dive into the server's logs revealed it. The string of code was a script that had been used to patch the final deal contract. Ben explained it in technical terms, but the gist was simple. A small, almost undetectable change had been made to the digital contract file on the company server after it had been officially signed by the other firm but before the final version was presented to Innovatech's board for official filing. The script had edited a single clause, the very one the CEO had flagged, and it had been done remotely. The script itself was a masterpiece of digital camouflage, but its origin was what made my blood run cold. Buried in the metadata, a single line of text named the source IP address that had initiated the change. It was a private, unlisted network, and it belonged to Robert Sterling's personal home server. It was the whisper I had been looking for. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it. The proof. Robert hadn't made a mistake. He hadn't just gotten greedy. He had actively sabotaged the deal from his own home, using his technical knowledge to create a backdoor edit in the contract. But why? This is big, Liv, Ben said, his voice hushed. This isn't a mistake. It's a calculated, malicious act. He then pointed to another detail in the metadata. The script had a secondary function. It didn't just alter the clause, it was designed to reroute all email communications about the deal to an outside server before the information was fully sent to Innovateca's CEO. It was a digital sieve, filtering information, allowing Robert to control what was seen and what was hidden. My God, I whispered. He's not just sabotaging the deal. He's been feeding the CEO false information about what's happening. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. Ben pointed to the secondary IP address, the one where the information was being rerouted. It didn't belong to Robert. The IP address was linked to a shell company, a corporate entity that was almost impossible to trace, but Ben's script had done a deep search on it. The registered agent for the shell company was a person, a name I knew well. Victoria Vance. The discovery of the intertwined digital plot between Robert Sterling and Victoria Vance was a seismic shock. It was a calculated, cold-blooded act of betrayal that went far deeper than I could have imagined. They weren't just working together, they were colluding, using Innovateca's own resources against it for a secret agenda. Ben and I were no longer just looking for proof of a simple mistake, we were uncovering a full-blown conspiracy. We spent the next 2 weeks diving deeper, meticulously unraveling the digital breadcrumbs they had left behind. Our goal was to build a bulletproof case, not just for my own vindication, but for the good of the company. It became clear that Robert's plan was far more complex than just killing the Nexus deal. He had done that to make Innovatec vulnerable. He had used the side deal to steer the company into a weak position, with the help of a rival firm. Ben's script became our most powerful tool. It allowed us to monitor Robert's encrypted archive without him knowing. It was a goldmine of information. We found dozens of emails and documents exchanged between Robert and a rival company, a tech giant named Titan Industries. The emails were coded, filled with corporate jargon that was actually a secret language for their plan. They weren't just killing a deal, they were preparing for a hostile takeover. The plan, as we pieced it together, was chilling in its audacity. Robert had fed Titan Industries inside information about Innovateca's vulnerabilities, its long-term strategy, and its key assets. The Nexus deal, which would have strengthened Innovatec and made it a more difficult target, had to be stopped. So Robert had intentionally sabotaged it, using the forged clause to make Innovatec look reckless and legally unsound. This would drive down our stock price, making us a more appealing and easier target for a takeover. Victoria Vance's role was revealed in the same emails. She wasn't just a director of business development, she was a mole, a plant from Titan Industries. She had been tasked with getting close to Robert, feeding him information and acting as a liaison. The shell company and the rerouted emails were her doing. She was the one who was secretly relaying all of Innovateca's information back to her true employers at Titan. She was a master manipulator, and I had fallen for her act hook, line, and sinker. The evidence was overwhelming. We had emails detailing the secret payoffs, the timeline of the sabotage, and the plan for the hostile takeover. The information was too big to ignore. This wasn't just a personal issue anymore, it was a matter of corporate survival. If I went to the CEO with this, I would be exposing Robert, a senior vice president, and Victoria, a director, as traitors. The company would be thrown into a state of panic, and the hostile takeover would likely be successful. I needed to act with precision. My plan began to form, a slow-burning ember of righteous anger. I wouldn't just expose them, I would use their own tactics against them. I had to create a trap that would catch both of them, a trap that would not only prove their conspiracy but also protect the company. The first step was to prove their guilt beyond a shadow of a doubt, in a way that couldn't be denied or covered up. I needed to do something that would force them into the open, that would make them expose their own conspiracy to the CEO, without me having to be the one to present the evidence. My revenge would be silent, calculated, and carried out with a single click. My plan was a single, devastating move, a digital Trojan horse that would carry the truth straight to the CEO's inbox. I couldn't risk presenting the evidence myself, they would deny it, and a senior vice president's word would hold more weight than a senior analyst's. I had to make the evidence appear as though it came from within their own network, as if their carefully constructed system had finally backfired on them. The idea was simple in concept, but complex in execution. I would use the very same rerouting script that Robert and Victoria had put in place to send the CEO a single, revealing email. But this wasn't an email I could just write. It had to look like a confidential, time-sensitive message between Robert and Victoria that had accidentally been leaked to the CEO's inbox. This would not only prove their conspiracy, but it would also reveal the full scope of their plan to Innovateca's leadership, all while making them believe it was an error on their part. I worked with Ben for a full week, hunched over his computer, to craft the perfect email. We analyzed hundreds of their past communications to get the tone, the corporate jargon, and the cadence just right. The email had to sound like something Robert would say, direct and to the point, and it had to contain the most damning evidence. We would embed a link to a secure, off-site cloud server where we had stored the most critical documents, the full report on the hostile takeover, the correspondence with Titan Industries, and the financial records of their payoffs. This link would be disguised to look like a simple, internal company memo. The final piece of the puzzle was the timing. It had to be delivered at the precise moment it would cause the most damage to them, and the most good for Innovatec. I chose the date of the next major board meeting, a meeting where Robert was scheduled to brief the board on the progress of a new, post-Nexus strategy. This was his chance to spin the narrative, to position himself as a hero who had identified a flaw in the old deal and was now saving the company with a new plan. My email would drop just minutes before his presentation was scheduled to begin. I knew the risks. If I failed, if the email was intercepted, or if they found out what I was doing, my career would be over. I would be fired, sued, and my professional reputation would be in tatters. But the feeling of injustice was too strong to ignore. I had worked too hard, and their betrayal was too deep. I had to do it. The plan was set. We had the email drafted, the link embedded, and the delivery mechanism perfected. Ben had built a script to trigger the email at a specific time, bypassing all of the corporate security firewalls. The Trojan horse was ready to be launched. I felt a sense of calm resolve, the kind of stillness that comes after a long, righteous rage. I had been a victim for too long. Now, I was in control. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The CEO, with the board's unanimous support, had Robert Sterling escorted from the premises by security. Victoria Vance, who had been on a flight to meet with her contacts at Titan Industries, was grounded and called into an emergency meeting. Innovateca's legal team immediately began working to get a restraining order against Titan Industries to prevent the hostile takeover. The company's stock, which had been plummeting, began to stabilize as the news of the conspiracy was released. The CEO called me into his office the next day. I walked in, expecting a lecture, maybe even a firing for my unauthorized access to corporate systems. Instead, he simply gestured for me to sit down. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were clear and focused. "Olivia," he said, his voice quiet. "I owe you an apology. We should have seen this coming. Robert had my trust, and he used it to betray us all. Your work on the Nexus deal was flawless. He's the one who deliberately sabotaged it. The full report you sent, there's no way he can deny it." I took a deep breath. "I know. Ben and I found everything." "Ben and you?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "You took a huge risk. You knew you could have been fired for this, didn't you? Yes, I said, but my promotion wasn't as important as my integrity. I saw a wrong, and I had to make it right. It was a matter of justice. He smiled, a small, weary smile. Justice it is. You did a great service to this company. You're not just a senior analyst anymore. You have a new title. He slid a manila folder across his desk. Congratulations, Director of Strategic Planning. I opened the folder, my hands shaking. Inside was a letter, dated that morning, with my new title and a significantly increased salary. It was more than a promotion, it was a full validation of my work and a recognition of my courage. Robert Sterling's career was over. He was fired and faced criminal charges for corporate espionage. Victoria Vance was also fired and her name was blacklisted from the industry. The hostile takeover was averted. The company, in a move of transparency, announced that a rogue employee had attempted to sabotage the company, but their plot had been foiled by a brave and vigilant employee. My name was never released to the public, just a quiet hero within the corporation. My revenge was complete. It wasn't a loud, dramatic act of violence or public shaming. It was a single, silent click that had the power to expose a massive conspiracy and restore justice. I had used their own tactics against them, letting their digital web of lies be the very thing that caught them. I went back to my desk, the chaos of the past few weeks now replaced by a quiet, determined calm. I had a new, much bigger office and a team to lead. Ben, my accomplice and friend, was given a promotion as well, a nod to his critical role in the operation. As for me, I learned a vital lesson about corporate trust, about ambition, and about the power of a single, well-placed act of revenge. Robert had built a monument to his ego, and I had brought it crashing down with a whisper in the metadata. And as I started my new, much more challenging job, I knew I would never again let the polished charm of a superior obscure the truth. My story was a testament to the power of a single person to change the outcome, not with a loud voice, but with a quiet, calculated act.